Planet America's fake news.
What the hell is going on here?
Welcome und bienvenue. This is Planet America and I'm John Barron.
I'm Chester Chidello.
This week, out of the shadows, public hearings reveal more evidence of abuse of presidential powers as America's top diplomat in Ukraine drops a potential bombshell.
A member of my staff could hear President Trump on the phone asking Ambassador Sondland about the investigation.
But Republicans maintain none of it is first-hand evidence and none of it is impeachable. We'll be talking to former Republican Congressman Bob Barr, who ran the Clinton impeachment.
Presentation was boring and the substance was simply not there.
Scathing. Also this week, another Democrat has jumped into the White House race. And could Hillary Clinton be next? For the first time, the congressional inquiry into the president's possible abuse of power in dealings with Ukraine came out from behind closed doors and into televised public hearings this week. The first witnesses recalled after their earlier private testimony were career diplomats William Taylor and George Kent. Taylor is the former US ambassador to Ukraine who was brought out of retirement to replace Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch in May, after she was sacked over what she claims was a smear campaign that she opposed President Trump's Ukraine policies. Taylor is now acting Ukraine ambassador, the chargé d'affaires, and he's raised concerns about US military aid being withheld from Ukraine until they publicly announced an investigation into the Bidens and the 2016 campaign. Also appearing, George Kent, he's the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Ukraine Policy. He too has sounded the alarm over a shadow foreign policy being run by associates of the president in contravention of US and Ukrainian national security interests. As far as the president is concerned, though, Taylor and Kent are simply
Never Trumpers.
The president says he didn't actually watch, although he tweeted 30 times about the hearing. In fact, the witnesses were asked about that particular tweet.
Mr. Kent, are you a never Trumper?
I am a career non-professional who serves whatever president is duly elected and carries out the foreign policies of that president in the United States, and I've done that for 27 years for 3 Republican presidents and 2 Democrat presidents.
Ambassador Taylor, are you a never Trumper?
No, sir.
Much of Taylor and Kent's testimony was building on known aspects of this case. This is how Bill Taylor summed it up.
Holding up of security systems that would go to a country that is fighting aggression from Russia for no good policy reason, no good substantive reason, no good national security reason is wrong.
But this was entirely new, a new detail that Bill Taylor says he only found out about last week after his earlier testimony. On July 26th, the day after the phone call between Presidents Trump and Zelensky that triggered the whole inquiry, President Trump took a call from his EU ambassador, Gordon Sondland, who was in Kiev to meet with Ukrainian National Security Advisor, Andriy Yermak.
A member of my staff could hear President Trump on the phone asking Ambassador Sondland about the investigations. Ambassador Sondland told President Trump the Ukrainians were ready to move forward. Following the call with President Trump, the member of my staff asked Ambassador Sondland what President Trump thought about Ukraine. Ambassador Sondland responded that President Trump cares more about the investigations of Biden, which Giuliani was pressing for.
That staff member, David Holmes, is being deposed today, and Associated Press is reporting a second US official also heard that call. Gordon Sondland is due to appear in public hearings next week. Taylor has repeatedly said it was his, quote, clear understanding from multiple interactions with Sondland, as well as Special Envoy Kurt Volker and others, that military aid was being withheld until an investigation into the Bidens was publicly announced by Ukraine, and that announcement was to be made in a CNN interview in September. Republican Representative Jim Jordan, though, disputed that conclusion.
Now, with all due respect, Ambassador, your clear understanding was obviously wrong, because it didn't happen. President Zelensky didn't announce he was going to investigate Burisma or the Bidens. He didn't do a press conference and say, I'm going to investigate the Bidens, we're going to investigate Burisma. He didn't tweet about it, and you just told the ranking member he didn't do the CNN interview and announce he's going to investigate Burisma, or the Bidens.
And that is pretty much the core of the Republican defence of Donald Trump right now. Zelensky didn't announce an investigation into the Bidens, and the delayed military aid started flowing in September anyway. It was only delayed by 55 days until they could convince themselves that Zelensky was a good guy. So no quid pro quo, and it never actually happened.
Yeah, although as the Democrats noted, the military aid was only released after the investigation started and the whistleblowers' complaints started doing the rounds.
In fact, it was only 2 days after this particular set of committees began their investigations that the Trump administration eventually released the military aid.
Also, there's a real question mark over whether Trump even wanted the military aid to be released. According to Bloomberg, someone in the State Department quietly released the aid a few days before Trump announced it, which is very curious.
I am curious about that. Republicans also contend that as Zelensky didn't personally raise concerns about pressure to investigate Biden with Ambassador Taylor, there was no pressure exerted.
Yeah, they noted that Zelensky didn't even know that the military aid was being withheld on July 25. So once again, like before, there can't have been a quid pro quo on that famous phone call between Trump and Zelensky.
The Ukrainian president stood in front of the world press and repeatedly, consistently, over and over again, interview after interview, said he had no knowledge of military aid being withheld, meaning no quid pro quo, no pressure, no demands, no threats, no blackmail, nothing corrupt. And unlike the first 45 minutes that we heard from the Democrats today, that's not secondhand information, it's not hearsay, it's not what someone overheard Ambassador Sondland say. That was his direct testimony.
But remember, Zelensky had been trying to get an official visit with Trump since May, so that pressure existed at least. And of course, this process continued long after the phone call. According to the New York Times, Zelensky knew about the military aid freeze by the first week of August, so there's pressure there. By the way, you know how you can tell that the call was actually a problem?
How?
Look at how Republican House Leader Kevin McCarthy reacted when he first was read the call transcript.
President Zelensky says we are almost ready to buy more javelins from the United States for defense purposes. And President Trump replies, I would like you to do us a favor, though.
Well, you just added another word.
No, it's
you said,
in
I'd
the
like
transcript.
you to do a favor, though?
Yes, it's in the White House transcript.
So there's a reason he got nervous about the word though. That's the word that connects the quid and the quo. Democrats also noted that, of course, Zelensky said he wasn't being pressured. He needed to stay in the Trump administration's good books and not look weak to his people. But Zelensky clearly experienced some pressure because he booked that interview we heard about before with Fareed Zakaria to give the Trump administration what they wanted, a public commitment to investigations. And how do you know he was pressured into that interview? Well, because as soon as the aid was released, Zelensky backed away from giving that interview. That says it all.
Fareed's the real victim here. That would have been a great interview. Republicans maintain, though, that this is all second and third hand evidence, although the Sondland-Trump phone call overheard by David Holmes does get a lot closer to first hand evidence. And Democrats point out that they've asked people with first hand evidence, like Rudy Giuliani, Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, Energy Secretary Rick Perry, to testify, and they have refused or been blocked. And that is what makes Sondland so pivotal. And Bill Taylor is standing by his account that Sondland has confirmed there was a quid pro quo.
Ambassador Sondland also told me that he recognized that it was a mistake to have told the Ukrainians that only the meeting with the president in the Oval Office was held up on in order to get these investigations. No, it was not just the meeting, it was also the security system. That is everything.
Yeah, Jim Jordan worked that second and third hand evidence point really well, I thought. This was Jordan reading a quote from Sondland.
Let me read it one more time. Ambassador Taylor recalls that Mr. Morrison told Ambassador Taylor that I told Mr. Morrison that I conveyed this message to Mr. Yarmouk on September 1st, 2019 in connection with Vice President Pence's visit to Warsaw and a meeting with President Zelensky. We got 6 people having 4 conversations in one sentence, and you just told me this is where you got your clear understanding, and you're their star witness. You're their first witness. You're the guy. You're the guy based on this, based on, I mean, I've seen church prayer chains that are easier to understand than this.
I love a quick reader.
He's good.
Yeah. As Jordan also pointed out, these guys didn't even speak to Trump, Giuliani or Mulvaney during this entire process. But on the other hand, Am I the only one that finds it odd that Republicans are so bothered by second-hand evidence when the witness they're obsessed with talking to, the whistleblower, only offers second-hand evidence? It got to the point where they were trying to work the whistleblower into anything.
Well, I guess my question to the witnesses then is, when are House Republicans going to find out what House Democrats already know? When are we going to find out the details of the contact between Chairman Schiff and the whistleblower? What they met about, when they met, the number of times they met, the discussions that were had.
Huh?
Yeah, they clearly want the whistleblower there to show that he doesn't know anything firsthand. I think that's kind of the point. Meanwhile, Democrat counsel Daniel Goldman asked George Kent about the possibility that there was something relating to the Bidens that the Ukrainians should investigate.
To your knowledge, is there any factual basis to support those allegations?
None whatsoever.
When Vice President Biden acted in Ukraine, did he act in accordance with official U.S. policy?
He did.
And this leads us to what, in my view, is the Republicans' main defence at the moment, that Trump wasn't focused on Biden so much as genuinely investigating corruption. Now, we've talked about this theory before, how if Trump was genuinely looking to fight Ukrainian corruption, it's odd that he only seemed interested in corruption involving his 2016 and 2020 opponents. It's also odd that he did nothing for the first 2 years of his presidency until his re-election drew near. And it's also odd that the body he tapped to conduct this investigation into public corruption wasn't the State Department or the FBI, but his private lawyer, who said, "This isn't foreign policy." But that information will be very, very helpful to my client and may, repeat, may be helpful to my government. Doesn't sound like it's in the national interest to me. Also, Trump seemed to be more concerned with public statements being made about the investigation than the investigation itself, or as Taylor put it,
President Trump, through Ambassador Sondland, was asking for President Zelensky to very publicly commit to these investigations, that it was not sufficient to do this in private, that this needed to be a very public statement.
Of course, a real investigation would be better off secret than publicly announcing itself, not to mention that the Undersecretary of Defense had already certified that Ukraine had taken substantial actions to decrease corruption so the aid could be released. And finally, George Kent made what I think was the most underrated point of the day, which was that the investigation into Burisma and its owner Zlochevsky that Biden supposedly short-circuited for his son's benefit was actually shut down by a corrupt prosecutor in 2014.
The $23 million was frozen until somebody in the General Prosecutor's Office of Ukraine shut the case, issued a letter to his lawyer, and that money went poof.
So essentially paid a bribe to make the case go away?
That is our strong assumption, yes, sir. To the best of my knowledge, the case against Zlochevsky, the former minister, was shut down December of 2014.
So it's hard for Joe Biden's actions to have affected that investigation 15 months after it was shut down.
Well, joining us now from Atlanta is Bob Barr. He's a former federal prosecutor and Republican congressman. In 1998, he was one of the driving forces behind the impeachment of President Bill Clinton. More recently, he was the Libertarians' 2008 presidential nominee, although he has since rejoined the Republican Party. Bob Barr, welcome to Planet America.
It's wonderful to be with you all. Thank you for having me.
Tell us, how credible did you find the evidence yesterday from Ambassador William Taylor and George Kent?
Well, if I were evaluating it on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd give it between a 0 and a -1. I thought the presentation was boring and the substance was simply not there. So I was not at all impressed with either the presentation or the presenters.
I mean, that's interesting because others have described the same evidence as simply devastating to the president's cause. So is this whole thing just going to be viewed through this hyper-partisan lens?
It's a political argument over policy. The two State Department witnesses that we heard from, I don't think fairly can be said not to have had an axe to grind. I think they have a clear peeve, so to speak, with the president over how he is conducting foreign policy. This is not something new. There often is tension, as you know, between how a president operates and how the careerists at the Department of State would like him to operate. And that seems to be playing itself out here. In other words, you have career bureaucrats at the State Department who don't like the way the president is conducting foreign policy. They think that they ought to be in charge of it, and the president believes correctly that he is in charge.
Mr. Barr, let's say in a month's time the Democrats have conclusively proven that Trump withheld military aid from the Ukraine for the sole purpose of getting them to smear his 2020 opponent. Is that offence in itself bad enough to justify impeachment in your book?
Not in my book. In my book, it really requires, that is, impeachment requires a very serious abuse of office that either rises to the level of a criminal offense, as was the case in the Clinton impeachment. Perjury and obstruction of justice were shown to have been committed by the president, or in the words of the Constitution, bribery, which we don't have here. If, in fact, the Democrats are able to show conclusively that there was a link between the president dealing with the Ukraine and their aid that they want and assisting in a matter that would possibly help him politically, that really is a political issue. To me, it's not an impeachment issue.
I suppose, Mr. Barr, some see this as being more than just about policy differences. This is withholding military aid from an ally at a time when that ally is at war to benefit the president's private, personal and political interests. How is that not worse than the Clinton case where he basically lied about having a consensual extramarital affair?
The way I see it, as the evidence has been presented thus far, U.S. relations with the Ukraine and Ukrainian interests were not being undermined by the president. They were actually being helped by the president. In other words, the assistance that Ukraine was seeking from the United States, particularly the military assistance, the Javelin missile system, for example, had not been provided to them by the prior administration. This administration, that is President Trump, made it available. And he was simply saying to Ukraine, the Ukrainian leader, look, we're giving you assistance, but what we need from you is your assistance to us in working with our Attorney General to get to the bottom of and clear up corruption, both in your government and that was reflected in our election in 2016. That not only does not undermine what Ukrainian interests are, but it actually will help Ukrainian interests and U.S. interests going forward.
How do you feel about the argument that if Trump was serious about investigating corruption, he would have investigated it completely differently? He would have investigated more people earlier on, and he would have used the FBI or the State Department rather than Rudy Giuliani?
I'm a firm believer in a president using the Department of Justice, that is the Attorney General and federal agencies such as the FBI, to conduct criminal or potentially criminal investigations, whether here at home in the United States or abroad. So that is my preference. At the same time, I think that a president, if he wants to use another attorney to assist in that effort, that is not illegal, although I think it's better to use the normal channels, to be honest with you.
Finally, is there any scandal that you've seen from the Trump administration over the last 3 years that you thought could have potentially formed the basis of a more fruitful topic for an impeachment proceeding that you're surprised the Democrats haven't pursued?
Well, it's not the case that there haven't been all sorts of things that the Trump administration has done that make people upset. But whether or not there is anything that is impeachable, not on what I've seen. What I have seen, though, are a number of issues that would be and should be appropriate subjects for the Congress, the House, to investigate as part of its oversight responsibility. And then after it exercises its oversight responsibility, to inquire into whether or not, for example, there have been improper payments that benefited the president, or whether the so-called emoluments clause in the Constitution has been violated. then what the House should do, if in fact then any of those investigations develop evidence of serious impeachable offenses, then to move to an impeachment. But what they're doing is they're putting the cart before the horse. They're saying, we want to impeach, so we're going to impeach, and then we'll develop the evidence afterwards.
Bob Barr in Atlanta, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
My pleasure entirely. Thank you for having me.
Well, this is, of course, one of those issues that has become deeply partisan to the point of Republicans and Democrats existing in parallel universes. We heard from Bob Barr there. Well, Harry Lippmann is a former Deputy Assistant Attorney General, a Democrat who was a legal advisor to the John Kerry presidential campaign in 2004. And he's with us now from Washington, D.C. Harry Lippmann, welcome to the program.
Thank you, John. Good to be here.
We're in the very early stages, of course, of the public hearings in this impeachment process. What is your reading of how this has been conducted so far? Is this unfolding in the way that Democrats would like?
You know, I think so. Adam Schiff, who's conducting things, is a former prosecutor, and I think he's taken a kind of prosecutorial approach. He's been very deliberate and methodical to get all the facts into the record and before both the Congress and the American people. That is really what's needed. There have been some who said he needs to have a little more flash, but that's exactly what he doesn't need, I think, as a prosecutor. He's thinking about the entire process and having a story to tell at the end with meticulously having assembled all the evidence he needs. The focus is on the witnesses, not on him. I think that is different on the Republican side. But I think as a former prosecutor, the way I'd put it is the evidence to date has gone in very clean.
Clearly, the Republicans are pushing back on a number of fronts. Part of it is we're not dealing with first-hand witnesses here. We're dealing with second, third, fourth-hand hearsay witnesses. We're hearing from State Department diplomatic lifers who don't like Donald Trump and don't like his policy and are pushing back and trying to find a way to get rid of him. How do Democrats counter those critiques?
I mean, I do think that's the instinct. They're almost a one-trick pony. It's always going to the bona fides and bad faith of the people. The hearsay notion really is a canard. Watergate and Clinton was 100% hearsay. Hearsay is admissible, of course, if it seems reliable. So the real question when they say this is, does anybody actually think that these, we saw them yesterday, these lifelong patriots, very well decorated, et cetera, are lying and are making it up? So when you assemble the stories from many different vantage points, it just seems to me, any reasonable person will know that that's what happened. But so the attacks on the other side, I think, have to somehow posit that there's some deep state conspiracy involved, and it's all about personal partisan politics. I think that is the prism that Trump tends to think things through. And the real question for anybody who watched the hearings, does that accord with the people you saw up there and the different sources of facts as you know them? The fact, for example, that Giuliani, who's his personal lawyer, is running the show. I just think it's a nice legal term they throw around, but the question is, have we presented a really credible, have the Democrats presented a credible account of the facts? That seems quite clear to me.
As we look ahead to the next week or so, where we've got some pretty high-profile public testimony coming up, what should we be looking out for, do you think?
Well, so now Sondland and Volker have already testified. I see this, John, kind of lining up with two teams, the clear good guys and the clear bad guys, and it'll become more and more apparent. But the bad guys pretty clearly are Giuliani, Sondland, Volker, Pompeo, and Mulvaney. Two of them are going to testify, and especially Sondland's testimony. He was the one who Taylor just testified yesterday, although hearsay, that he got a call from the president, by the way, flagrant security abuses, but those are all just trivial now, asking about the day after the big call with Zelensky, asking, about the investigations of Biden's and Burisma. I don't think he's going to want to lie, and he's going to really be in a corner, in a sticky place. So that's tomorrow. Yovanovitch will be interesting, but we know by and large what they're going to say. I would look to Sondland and Volker as the sort of points of high drama in the next couple weeks.
So good to talk to you again, Harry Lippmann. Thank you.
Likewise. Thanks for having me, John.
Now to a story that would probably be our lead if the president wasn't currently being impeached. The trial of longtime Trump political advisor and friend of the show, Roger Stone. The jury is now considering its verdict in the case. Stone is accused of lying to Congress and a little bit of witness tampering on the side. Among those taking the stand, albeit unwillingly, former Trump campaign manager Steve Bannon.
Yes, I was compelled to testify.
And what did he testify?
Steve Bannon testified under oath that Donald Trump's 2016 campaign considered Trump's longtime confidant Roger Stone as the, quote, access point, end quote, to WikiLeaks.
Stone the access point to WikiLeaks, and that matters because in his written answers to Special Counsel Robert Mueller, President Trump said he didn't recall discussing WikiLeaks with Stone or that Stone discussed WikiLeaks with individuals associated with his campaign. In his evidence to Congress, Roger Stone also denied talking to anyone in the Trump campaign about WikiLeaks, saying he, quote, did not. Evidence heard from another Trump advisor, though, Rick Gates, contradicted that. Gates says that he was with Trump when he spoke to Stone by phone in mid-2016 and the pair were discussing the first release of hacked Democrat emails. Prosecutor Aaron Zelinsky asked, after Mr. Trump got off the phone with Mr. Stone, what did Mr. Trump say? Gates replied, he indicated more information would be coming. Stone himself did not testify. He's facing a potential prison term. He could also seek a pardon from his longtime associate, President Trump, but then again, Stone's former business partner, Paul Manafort, who was Trump's campaign chairman, may well have been hoping for the same thing, and he's currently serving a 7.5-year jail term for bank fraud. At the end of it all, plenty of evidence that Roger Stone lied to Congress, and evidence as well that President Trump lied to Robert Mueller, or at least that he has a really bad memory. Well, there are persistent reports this week that Hillary Clinton has not yet ruled out a 2020 presidential campaign, although the big news this week was former Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick. He has officially jumped into the Democratic presidential primary.
This time is about more than removing an unpopular and divisive leader, as important as that is, but about delivering instead for you. So in a spirit of profound gratitude for all the country has given to me, and with a determination to build a better, more sustainable, more inclusive American dream for the next generation, I am today announcing my candidacy for President of the United States.
Well, this is a last-minute change of heart for Deval Patrick, who was laying the groundwork for a campaign last year before ruling it out, citing the cruelty of American politics. But now, he says he's in, urged on by supporters of his close friend President Barack Obama, reportedly worried that Joe Biden's campaign is faltering. But so far, Patrick is keeping the gloves on.
I admire and respect the candidates in the Democratic field. They bring a richness of ideas and experience and a depth of character that makes me proud to be a Democrat. But if the character of the candidates is an issue in every election, this time is about the character of the country.
What the hell does that mean? Give me a translator.
I think he's trying to say he's a uniter, not a divider. Governor Patrick is 63 years of age. He spent 8 years as governor of Massachusetts, only the second African-American governor of any state. He's a former civil rights lawyer. He's worked with Bain Capital, which was founded by another former Massachusetts governor you might have heard of by the name of Mitt Romney. That is likely to put him squarely in the sights of his fellow Bay Stater, Elizabeth Warren. Deval Patrick reportedly called Vice President Biden last weekend to inform him of his decision to get into the race.
Yeah, and he's already missed the filing deadline for Alabama and Arkansas, so he better get a wriggle on. This would not be pleasing to Joe Biden, I imagine. Of course, he's already got his hands full with his scragging of Elizabeth Warren. Biden's new strategy is apparently Warren is a smarty britches who thinks if you don't agree with her, you're an idiot. Smarty britches, eh? Well, he's got the little rascals vote wrapped up at least. But he'd better watch out who he calls smarty britches.
I think I probably have a much higher IQ than you do, I suspect, and I'd be delighted to sit down and compare my IQ to yours if you'd like, Frank.
Oh.
Before he was cute Uncle Joe.
Nothing mean. Mind you, Elizabeth Warren has her own issues. The economist she used to back her healthcare plan has come right out and said that he thinks when you add up all her plans together that her wealth tax won't raise nearly as much money as she thinks it will. But it's okay, John. I think, as always, she's got a plan for that. She'll ignore him.
It's a good plan. We've talked a bit in recent weeks about the outsized influence of first-in-the-nation primary state Iowa, which votes for the presidential nominees on February 3rd. A new poll this week from Monmouth confirms the strong showing of the Mayor of South Bend, Indiana, Pete Buttigieg, at the recent Liberty and Justice celebration in Des Moines. Mayor Pete has surged into first place in Iowa, ahead of Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. And a bit more support coming up for Minnesota's Amy Klobuchar showing through as well. The rest still struggling. That 1% showing from former San Antonio Mayor Julian Castro might help explain why he's making comments this week like this.
2020 contender Julian Castro, campaigning in Iowa, says Iowa and New Hampshire should not be the first states on the presidential nominating calendar because they're too white.
And Castro's right that Iowa and New Hampshire are very, very white. 85% white in Iowa and 90% white in New Hampshire. Although defenders of the calendar say other states that vote in the first month of primaries, Nevada with its large Latino population and South Carolina with its large black population, balance out those first two states. Castro's campaign is now running on fumes. He says he will drop out if he can't raise $800,000 by the end of next week, and that makes next Wednesday's debate his last roll of the dice.
Yeah, we said a few weeks back how well set up Buttigieg was in Iowa and New Hampshire, and so he had the potential to take off. Well, this is what taking off looks like. Buttigieg has a favourability in Iowa of 73%. That's the most in the field, with the lowest unfavourability by miles, so he has heaps more room to grow as well. And that favourability is important, because in Iowa, if your candidate carries less than 15% of the room, you get a second choice. So if a candidate is popular and there are a lot of also-rans in the race, which there are in this one, the candidate can really clean up with people's second preferences, which is why my prediction is that the next debate will be stacks on Mayor Pete. The other candidates need to take some shine off that guy. Klobuchar's even getting in early.
Of the women on the stage, I'm focusing here on my fellow women senators, Senator Harris, Senator Warren, and myself. Do I think that we would be standing on that stage if we had the experience that he had? No, I don't. Maybe we're held to a different standard.
Mike Bloomberg wouldn't be the first super-rich American to run for the presidency. Nelson Rockefeller ran twice as a moderate Republican in the 1960s and was appointed vice president under Jerry Ford. Businessman Ross Perot ran twice in the 1990s and he won more votes than any third-party candidate in 80 years. Publisher Steve Forbes ran for the Republican nomination in 1996 and 2000, but he didn't get very far. Then, of course, there was Donald Trump, who flirted with presidential politics for close to 30 years before winning an upset victory in 2016. But what makes Michael Bloomberg unique is the sheer size of his fortune, approaching $60 billion, making him the 9th richest person on Earth. When Mike Bloomberg was making his first few million as a Wall Street equities trader in the 1970s, he identified as a Democrat. He was still a Democrat in the 1980s when he set out on his own, providing high-end financial data and news via a designated terminal. And as his media empire grew in the 1990s to include Bloomberg News, he was still a Democrat. It was only when he decided to run for mayor of New York in 2001 that Bloomberg became a Republican. Here's how he explained it to the ABC at the time.
The Democrats had 4 candidates there already. I certainly would not have had an opportunity to run as a Democrat. And since the Republicans asked me, and I agreed with their fiscal conservatism in the city, and they believe in good government, and our current mayor is a Republican who is pro-choice, which I am, is against the death penalty, which I am, is in favor of gun control, which I am, as in favor of gay rights, which I am. I didn't have a moral or ethical or philosophical difference with the Republican Party. And it's an opportunity to get to the public.
The Republican Party primary was on September 11th, 2001, and after being delayed by the terrorist attacks, Bloomberg went on to win it and the mayoralty, promising to rebuild the city's economy. It came at a cost, though. Bloomberg spent $73 million on that campaign, 5 times that of his Democratic rival.
I, Michael R. Bloomberg, do solemnly swear.
If Rudy Giuliani was the face of New York's response to 9/11, Bloomberg's was the face of its recovery. And as the war on terror expanded into Iraq, Mayor Bloomberg took centre stage at the 2004 Republican convention in New York, renominating George W. Bush for a second term.
The terrorists hit us there. Our knees buckled, but we stayed on our feet.
A year later, Bloomberg was flying high. He was re-elected mayor by a 20-point margin, but not before spending over $85 million on his campaign. He was a curious hybrid, progressive on social issues, supporting abortion rights and marriage equality, but a pro-business fiscal conservative who brought the budget back into surplus. It led to some odd outcomes, vocal on climate change and the environment, but unwilling to spend enough on sanitation to keep the city's streets clean. He supported stricter gun control and also backed the New York Police's controversial stop and frisk strategy. When the global financial crisis hit in 2008, Bloomberg pushed to change a city law so he could run for a third term, and run he did, spending $102 million to win again. But Bloomberg's time in office is probably best remembered for this.
New York City planning to outlaw sales of big sodas and other sweet drinks over a certain size in an effort to curb obesity. It is the first ever nationwide ban of its kind.
To many, that was nanny state arrogance. Bloomberg's big soda ban was shot down by the courts as unconstitutional. It was also during his final term that Bloomberg announced he was quitting the Republican Party to become an independent. And it was as an independent that Bloomberg appeared at the Democrat convention in 2016, nominating Hillary Clinton, to call on Republicans and independents to lend her their support.
Hillary Clinton is not flawless. No candidate is. But she is the right choice and the responsible choice in this election.
And Mike Bloomberg took square aim at fellow New Yorker Donald Trump.
I'm a New Yorker, and I know a con when I see one.
Like Trump, Mike Bloomberg had considered running for the presidency several times as an independent in 2008, 2012 and 2016. Always someone to look long and hard at the data, Bloomberg concluded a third-party candidacy, no matter how rich they were, could not win the White House. In October 2018, he announced he was registering once again as a Democrat, and he channeled $100 million into the Democrats' successful midterm campaign to win control of the House.
Wow.
And that set off another round of speculation. Bloomberg would finally run for president in 2020. Then, in April this year,
scratch one billionaire off the list for the 2020 presidential campaign. Former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg now saying he will not be running as a Democrat for the presidential nomination in that year.
Bloomberg was again expected to funnel hundreds of millions of dollars into Democratic coffers, but only if the party nominated somebody moderate like Joe Biden. His entry into the 2020 primaries now is a measure of his concerns a more progressive candidate like Elizabeth Warren could become the nominee. But he also risks skimming support from moderates. If elected, though, Mike Bloomberg would be America's first Jewish president and the oldest ever, turning 79 in his first month in office. As for his chances, this guy at least says Bloomberg has not got what it takes.
Little Michael will fail. He'll spend a lot of money. He's got some really big issues. He's got some personal problems, and he's got a lot of other problems. But I know Michael Bloomberg fairly well, not too well, fairly well, well enough. He will not do very well, and if he did, I'd be happy. There is nobody I'd rather run against than little Michael, that I can tell you.
And Trump might be referring to this, John. Turns out Bloomy's got a bit of a Me Too problem, with reports of disparaging comments that he made about women's bodies and appearances and allegations of him running a deeply sexist environment. There's plenty of examples if you look up that piece online there. Like Bloomberg, for instance, saying about an employee who claimed to be raped that he wouldn't believe her unless there was an unimpeachable third-party witness.
To a rape?
Yes, and when asked how exactly that would happen, he said, "There are times when 3 people are together." And how about this? Bloomberg thinks legalising marijuana is the, quote, stupidest thing we've done. And of course, like seemingly everyone, Bloomberg is very, very old.
Look, I would be 79 years old when I took office. People say, well, Ronald Reagan was 80 when he left. Yeah, when he was 80, they carried him out gaga.
Good luck, Mike.
Yeah, and Reagan wasn't 80. He was 77 going on 78. But
so he's a liar too! Yeah. But before we go, Trump's attempted unwinding of DACA finally reached the Supreme Court this week. I'm not going to go into legalities, but I'm referring to the so-called dreamers here. These are the kids who were born outside America, were brought into America illegally as little kids, and have now finished school, got a job, maybe joined the military. They're effectively American, but they're still illegal. And Trump tweeted out this weird message about them. Many of the people in DACA, no longer very young, are far from angels. Some are very tough, hardened criminals. But if the court rules against them, he said, a deal will be made with Dems for them to stay. Okay, so he'll make a deal for very tough, hardened criminals to stay? Of course, as always, there's more to it.
There's always a tweet.
To 2017, when Trump asked, does anybody really want to throw out good, educated young people who have jobs, some serving in the military? He was right the first time. Only 6.7% of people who even apply for DACA have been arrested at some point. Not convicted, mind you, arrested. And that's 78% below the community average. And we're out of time, so more on that in the extra.
Yeah, that is it for another week. It's going to be a bumper Planet America extra for iView, Facebook and YouTube.
Yes, we'll have more from Harry Lippmann and talk about the impeachment, 2020 race, DACA and a bunch of other stuff. See you there.
Bye-bye.